All right, welcome back, Business Freedom Podcast listeners. Y'all are in for a treat. Today, we've got Mike Wall on the call, and he is right between Dayton and Cincinnati. And so make sure your referrals, sort of the perk of being on the podcast, if you have any referrals, send them Mike's way. Mike, why don't you start off, hook the listeners with a little teaser around like what the business is going to do, and kind of a little tidbit about your growth trajectory. I think it'll get people to listen through to the whole story.
Yeah, no. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. I think, for us, the fact that we experienced so much growth so quickly is something certainly that the listeners will, I think pull some good quality value out of. And secondarily, you always talk about, the good, the bad, the ugly. I think where I'm at in my business right now, I definitely have some good quality information to share with your audience of mistakes not to make, right? And so I think that, I think people will want to listen to this one 2 or 3 times when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and what's the units and volume that your team will do?
Yeah, so this year we're on track to do about 312 units, following up on last year's 218. Our volume last year was just over 40 million, and we'll probably be somewhere around the 65 million mark this year.
Awesome. Very cool. Why don't you start us off? Is there any kind of motivational quote or kind of saying that you've hung on to over the course of the last, handful of years that has kind of kept you going, or a plaque on the wall, like something?
Yeah, man. It's certainly that's changed over the years as I've as I've grown throughout the business. Well, for me, it used to be about, hustle, 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 hustle. And I loved motivational quotes, but now it's more about, it's peace of mind. So my favorite quote right now is, if money is your hope for independence, you'll never have it. The only real security that a man will have in this world is a reserve of knowledge, experience, and ability. And Henry Ford said that.
That's awesome. Really good. And that's in the context of kind of your shift from just the hustle and the grind to building something that's more sustainable?
Yeah, because you can get lost in, growing for growth's sake, right? What I think what happens, or what happened to me, is that, we were just about growth, that there was no ceiling. And so we were on a journey where we would never get to the destination. And, for me, and you've talked about this before, but for me, obviously, it was costing me time with my family. It was costing me in health, right? And those are just things that I'm not willing to negotiate on anymore.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Why don't we break down the different phases of growth? So for you as like solo agent, maybe hiring that first assistant, to breaking into agent hiring, and then, I don't know where you are in your business now, if you're in production or not, but kind of break down the individual sort of the phases of growth, and then what were the struggles in each phase, and what advice would you give someone that's kind of breaking through those phases? This is the good, bad, ugly part. Like, what can we learn from, and not make the same mistakes that you made?
Yeah, sure. So, I started off, as I said before, I've been licensed since 2002. I went to work for one of the top teams in our area, a guy named Phil Herman, worked for Remax, was, selling 300 plus homes back in the early 2000s. I actually worked with Phil. Well, I figured the reason why when I got into the business, I went to work for him, is because I figured that, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I sought out the top person in our area to go learn from. And, certainly, I paid the educational cost in splits, and I was happy to do that. And, I actually ended up working with Phil for the good part of 7-8 years, and until about 2009. And then we know what happened in 2007. Essentially, I rode that out as long as I could, and then ended up having to go into corporate America. And I actually went back into corporate America until May of 2014. I was fortunate enough to work a role in outside sales, which allowed me some freedom to go at and prospect, and actually go out on appointments if I needed to. But in May of 2000, or excuse me, about November, late October, November of 2013, I started calling expireds. And by May of 2014, I had worked my way up to 44 listings. And essentially, I went to my wife and I said, honey, listen, it's costing me more money to be at this corporate job than it is to be in real estate. And she gave me her blessing to quit my job. We went full force that year, went out and sold 57 houses. And that was by myself. And then I picked up an admin that second year, which would have been 2015. We went out and sold 104 homes that year. I picked up a buyer specialist, potentially two, if I'm remembering correctly. And then the third year, we sold 187 homes, and we were really growing.
So
that
let's
third year.
I'm gonna slow you down because 85% of our industry doesn't have a freaking assistant. So how do you break down how you go from 55 to 105, I think it was, with
57 to 104.
57 to 104 with just an assistant? What does your daily schedule look like? How do you get your skills to the point where you can do that kind of production? And then we'll kind of go into that's the first stage of growth. That growth right there we need to honor that and kind of dig into that, because that comes with a whole set of challenges.
Yep.
So let's focus some time on there. What were the challenges? What did the daily schedule look like? How did you deal with, showing up as a husband? And I don't know if you guys have children or not, but
I do. I have two boys. I have a 10-year-old now, and a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old. And to your question, it was an absolute dumpster fire. I remember getting calls from, I was giving service at the lowest level. And I remember getting calls and not being able to return voicemail because I was on so many appointments. And I think at that point, my excuse was, I'm doing this for the family, right? We all talk about that. I'm doing this for the family. And I think for a while, maybe your family buys into that. And then it gets to the point to where you're absent so much that it starts to become a challenge. And, it's all been part of my growth journey too. We'll talk about that, I think, moving forward. But for me, there's no really eloquent way to put it. It was a comedy of errors. And so, certainly when I brought on that assistant, it helped me out so much in that, I could delegate some of the administrative side, which certainly got that off my plate and then allowed me to grow a little bit more. But daily schedule was just packed, man. It was 7 days a week. We were grinding. I mean, it was 80, 90, easily 80, 90 hours a week. I mean, and all day, Saturday, Sunday. And, fortunately for me, I have a great wife, great support system. She works in the home. So certainly in that regard, we were set up perfectly, kind of for this scenario. So, I'm not sure that, I think if anybody's going to take a nugget out of that of value it's that I didn't do it correctly. Certainly there was a better way to do it. And I think I probably just put off hiring an admin longer than I probably should have.
Yeah. And then what does the daily schedule look like to do 100+ units with just an admin? Is it literally, you're up at 5 and you're what did it look like?
Yeah. So, the funny thing about it now is that because I'm such a different person now, and I've come so far in my journey, I was just a prospecting machine. Like if I wasn't on an appointment, I was on the phones. And, for me, so, traditionally I'm always been I'm a big proponent of winning the morning. And I don't know if I knew actually what I was doing back then, but because I wasn't intentional about winning the morning, I was just doing it. I've always been into, getting up and working out, maybe not so much, journaling but I've always been a guy who kind of did my devotional in the morning. I've enjoyed that quiet time, but again, wasn't intentional about it. But yeah, I mean, you come 7:45. I mean, I'm at my desk and I'm grinding on the phones, and it was either me on the phones, or me being on appointments, and there was really nothing else I was doing at that point. And again, that's why I had all these listings. I had, clients calling me asking for, showing feedback, and just wasn't delivering on any of that.
Yeah. And so what does the next growth phase look like? So you've got the admin, things are completely sideways with your hours, probably making decent money, selling 100 homes with just one person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you spending any money on marketing, advertising, buying any leads at this point? Or is it all outbound prospecting?
Yeah, no, most of it was all based on outbound prospecting. I think that year, that second year when we were at 100, I think I brought in Tiger Leads is the first lead platform we went to. And I knew at that point that I think the kind of the nugget or the carrot at the end on the end of the pole that I dangled in front of agents was leads, right? That was our go-to back then was, hey, we provide leads. And that was, so for me, and being in some of the groups that I was in, I knew that my value add to our potential teammates would be that, we provided leads, and certainly a bevy of sign calls, right? I mean, we had 44 signs in the yard, and certainly we're getting, and that's another thing, Lars, that I didn't even mention is, oh my gosh, man, the amount of calls that were coming in off our signs were just, it was ridiculous. And I wasn't even able to answer most of those calls. Sometimes I wouldn't get back to those people. I can't imagine just at this point being able to look back on that and all the money that was probably slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, it's cool to look back on it and not have that going on today, I guess is the cool part of it. Talk about the transition to hiring salespeople and getting them productive, and how can an agent possibly hang with somebody like with your discipline, with your skill set? Like, maybe I'm assuming that it was hard to find salespeople that can operate at your level, but talk about the transition into, like I do, we do, they do, like what does that look like, and what were some of the challenges with that?
Yeah, I think the great thing about that phase of my business is that, I just had a lot of momentum, and it was that law of attraction, man. I had a lot of people that wanted to be a part of what I was doing, because, there was the recognition, just flat out crushing it. And I think that because there's such a low barrier of entry into the real estate market, in our area, and in probably every area, it makes it a little bit easier to compete and win. But the reality of it is it also makes it more difficult to find talent. And so for me, it was really about going out and trying to attract the right people. And I've made so many mistakes in hiring, you know what I mean? It's been one of the more difficult tasks, and I still fight with that today and probably always will. But it was really more about, I don't think I was seeking so much as I was attracting at that point. You know what I mean? And certainly I was attracting the right people into my circle. And a lot of the agents that came onto our team, they came from within the brokerage. So I guess I was lucky in that regard. But, at that point, as I look back on things, I didn't know what I didn't know. You know what I mean? I knew, like, there were people like you, there were people like Jake Kinder, Mike Reese, that certainly inspired me. They were, you guys were doing it at a different level. And I thought that for me, if I could just get those pieces in place, that the same thing would happen to me. And it's ultimately what led to me getting in a little bit over my head, I think, last year, because, you have to understand, I think, as a team leader, that when you add components, that you have to hold those components accountable. It's not just, you don't just piece a real estate team together. You can't just say, hey, okay, well, now I'm at the phase where I add an ops manager. Okay, well, now I'm at a phase where I add ISAs, right? You can't do that. You have to, every time you add a component to your business, you have to be able to hold it accountable. And so you have to set up a system that manages that component of your business to get some sort of a return. And I didn't do that. And that was one of the areas where I kind of had to dial it back this past year and get back on track.
Yeah. Let's talk about, and this might be one of them, but let's talk about, in our industry, I don't think it's shared enough, some of the failures and the times where we're ready to, like, give the thing back, give the thing back. Yeah. You can't do it with children, but I guess you can kind of just give your business back to wherever it came from. What were some of those failure points for you, and how did you respond? What were some of the lessons that you learned?
Yeah. So, it's interesting, and it almost sounds cliche because I listen to so many of these podcasts, but it's always, to me, it's the same problems that most everybody goes through on their business growth journey. Is that, the number one obviously was acquiring talent and hiring. I got to a point in my business where I was hiring out of necessity, and I wasn't actually vetting the people I was bringing on my team. If you had a real estate license, and you could fog a mirror, we had an opportunity for you, and ultimately that was. And what I wanted to do is I had this idea that I just wanted to grow this giant real estate team, right? That sold 1,000 houses a year. And I wasn't thinking through, the more agents you bring on, the more drama, right, you have in your business. It's not just, you don't just add an agent and they're good for 1 or 2 houses a month, right? It doesn't work that way. But and that may be reality in some areas. Maybe you can add an agent and they're worth 1 or 2, but you're not factoring in what can happen culturally to your real estate team when you bring on cultural cancers and people who are just who are not playing within your team's guidelines. It's so interesting that in this industry that if you're not holding the different components of your business accountable, like ultimately they will hold you accountable. And so that was the first big one, was hiring. I would say secondarily, when I actually got into coaching with you in 2016 and started to put some of the different components for building out a good foundation and a good back end. So, really I started to get more into like the tracking, which certainly helped out. And I think that's when we really started to see growth, because we went in 2015. We went from 104 to 187, but we went from 187 to 309, and that was a big jump, man. And I think, like, if I'm being honest with myself, I'm not sure that I can't say that the market being as good as it wasn't a contributor to that. And certainly when you make more money, it has a tendency to inflate your ego a little bit. And that's where I kind of got in trouble, is the fact that I knew how people were running a real estate business, and I knew the components of a successful real estate business, but I wasn't paying good enough attention to holding those different components accountable. And so if you don't hold those things accountable, when you live in a marketplace like mine with a low average sale price, because our average sale price is roughly 178. So you can make bigger mistakes like that when your average price point is higher. So it's a blessing and a curse, right? We realized right away that because our margins are so small, and because I wasn't holding these different components of my business accountable, that, the profit margins are slipping, right? And then, immediately you have to, you got to dial it back in. And then you have to, then what it forces you to do, and I'm saying this is probably not what you want to do, but what it did is forced me to go back and look at each one of those components and say, where am I getting the return here? And where am I not getting the return? We got to dial it back. Like with Zillow, right? We had our Zillow set up in the most unprofitable manner you can set it up. And what I mean by that is, we were giving Zillow leads to our team, which is probably mistake number one, because Zillow is it's very tough to be profitable when you're giving Zillow leads to your team. The only people I know that can make it with Zillow leads are people that work them on their own, because the margins are so tiny and they keep raising their prices. So the minute you give it over to a team member where you're on a split, they take another chunk out of it, right? And mistake number 2 was then funneling Zillow leads to our ISAs. So then I'm splitting Zillow profits 3 ways, right? And there's just no way to be profitable on Zillow leads splitting those 3 ways. But what would happen is, we were spending so much on Zillow that when we had a Zillow call come in, we wanted to make sure that call was answered, right? And so we said, okay, so if the agent's not going to do it, let's send it to the ISA. And so certainly we started to realize that, hey, we're not getting a return on Zillow. We actually cut Zillow completely in December of last year. And we won't be a part of, I understand, Zillow, they do own a large majority, if not most of the buyer market, and we're okay with that. But at the end of the day, we're focused on, we know our identity now, and we know that we're a prospecting based team, and so we're going to go out and own the listings, and then Zillow can, of course, go find us a buyer. We're happy to pay a 3% commission on that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. 18 months ago, we turned off any paid home search traffic whatsoever. And we only got to about 5,000 a month on Zillow. But even at that, we couldn't make a good return on it. Um, that's really cool. Let's dig into the current business a little bit. What's one thing you're doing really well right now in the business?
Well, I think since I reevaluated the business and what we're doing is we kind of went back to what was working before, man. And so like while in 2017 we went out and sold 309 homes that year, and then last year we actually sold 222 homes last year. And so we did $43.3 million in 2017. We did just over 40 million. So I think what we're looking to do at this point is really like we're holding each lead source accountable. I think we're doing a much better job of that. We've added accountability as something that we're taking very serious. In other words, we're doing Monday accountability sessions every week with our agents. We're reporting dials, contacts, nurtures, appointments, lender referrals, and so we're actually meeting with. So I guess the thing that I'm most excited about, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, is that when you start tracking your business, it almost gives you a sense of it removes anxiety. And so now that I know what's going on inside of our business, I don't have that anxiety that I used to have. See, I gotten to a point in my business where we had so much in the operating account that that I wasn't being disciplined enough with the money that I was spending. And that kind of goes back to what I was telling you before. So if I could say one thing that we're doing much better is that we're being a much more disciplined. We're taking a more cautionary approach. And I think the timing couldn't be better, because while the market is still pretty good here where I'm at, I think what we're seeing on the horizon, especially if you look into some of the major metropolitan areas, is the market starting to soften. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we are, we're at a point to where this will serve us moving forward into the new market, and it not only will it serve us, but it will help us to thrive. I think what you probably noticed and what we noticed as well is there are a lot of agents right now who could go out and be successful despite not having a good a good daily schedule. In other words, Uncle Bob would reach out to them to be ready to sell a house. Aunt Sue would reach out, right? There was all this type of business going on. And then as the market starts to tighten up and that goes away, I think what's going to happen is some of these agents who are selling business like that, or they don't have a daily schedule and they're not adhering to it, is that as the market starts to tighten up, some of those transactions will start to go away. And what'll happen essentially is some of those good agents who are out there right now will be able to provide a spot for them on our team. And so we're excited about, kind of the market tightening a little bit, because I think it's going to provide an opportunity for us to go out and acquire some talent. And so, that I know that's a long kind of winded answer to your question.
Yeah. And, in real estate B school, as you know, I mean, profit, it's a choice. It's not a lot of guys in this business. They're going after like spend all the money. And you mentioned it early on. It's growth for growth's sake. It's not a disciplined approach to business. Being able to increase your net worth over time as a business owner, it's more habit and discipline than it is, let's sell 500 homes.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing that I took from the comments you just made, is that you can get ahead of yourself and just chase transactions and have no discipline in the business. And, without tracking, we decided to tighten up our margins going into 2019. So we were able to cut out between $300,000 and $400,000 of spend this year compared to last year, and we'll increase our GCI, by 20%. So we're decreasing our expenses by 20% and increasing our GCI by 20% on 80% gross margin business because we run a very specific model. So just knowing your numbers, knowing your lead sources, like you said, knowing that on every transaction with Zillow, if you're in a team environment, you're likely losing money. You just don't know it, and you're too attached to the transactions and not the profit. So that's really,
Yeah.
really good advice. I love
And
every.
we're looking at stuff like now, and especially as I get, um, as I get further into my business journey, is you start to evaluate different things. Like, obviously, as a business owner, you evaluate return on investment, but then you start to you get into a point in your life to where you start evaluating return on time. And I think that, to me, so we're looking at, I have an investment company too, and to me, it's like, you really need, wherever you spend your time at. I mean, because we all have 24 hours in a day, right? And certainly we want to be able to spend some of that time with our family, and we want to spend some of that time on personal development, and then you want to spend some of that time in your business, and then some of that time working on your business. But some of the things we're starting to evaluate now, like for me, is like, I have an investment company too, and so like the things I think about, like if I'm going to spend my time right going out on a listing appointment where I can make X amount of dollars versus being out on an investment appointment, right? So if my average commission is like $5,500 and I'm looking at a return on time, but if I go out on an investment appointment, right, for acquiring a house that we did mailers on, or something where we're going to buy the property or we're going to wholesale it, like I could spend that same 30 to 45 minutes sitting in front of a seller where the potential commission or the potential payout would be 10 times that, right? It might be $50,000. So really, I'm starting to analyze that, like how I spend my time during my day, because like, while the investment business is a product of the real estate business, you have to evaluate now, since there are only 8 hours in a workday, or 10 hours, or however long you decide to work, what do you actually do inside of that? And then are you holding those hours accountable, right? Now that's my whole life now, man. It's just like, what holding everything accountable and track, holding all the time accountable, holding all the different components of my business accountable, and really trying to squeeze the most out of everything we have.
Yeah. And in Real Estate B School, we talk about, it's just the balance, and sometimes it's a dance, but it's time, money, and stress. Like, I want to show up at a high level in different areas of my life. So I can't, put too much time into the business, because then it'll lead to more stress. And then the money's irrelevant if you have too much time and too much stress. Like the other areas of your role as a dad and your role as a husband are not, it's not going to be good, and you'll end up, 10 years from now, your kids will be doing stuff that you probably could have helped them on who knows, any of that stuff. But I like it a lot.
And I'm going to say something really crazy right now, and I want people to understand this. I think, and you'll probably back me up on this, the difference between the lifestyles of somebody who makes $350,000 and somebody who makes $750,000 is not much different. It's just not. And the money is good, but that's where you start to look at the return on your time. And so there's return on investment, we know, and that's the driver in business, right? But the driver in life is return on time. And so, like, you need to understand that, man. At the end of the day, if you look at the lifestyle of somebody that makes $350,000, it's just not a lot different than somebody who makes $750,000. It's just not a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. I mean, and to not increase your lifestyle to chase something that ultimately is going to make you more stressed if your business isn't at a point where it can support it. So that's really good. Let me ask you, a lot of business owners struggle with enjoying the ride. And I know I have over the years, and not so much in the last few years. I've made some key moves with my schedule. But what practices have you put in place to make sure that you're appreciating this journey that you're on?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. And, the great thing about it is, you talk to a lot of agents, and we really are, we're all in this together. And I think you go through the different phases of growth. And for the most part, they look the same. It's been a real struggle for me, Lars, because, at first I didn't understand that. Right. And I think most people don't, right. It's like, let's go out and make as much money as possible, no matter what, at what cost. Right. And then as you start to make all this money, it's like, okay, well, this is not everything I thought it was. And so then you start to evaluate, how you're spending your time, and then are you enjoying the journey, right? And so, like, for me, that was a part of this that I never expected, because I think as you start to make money and you get more comfortable in life, it peels away some of the anxiety that maybe you had before when you didn't have a lot of money, or when your life was based on not having enough money or wanting more money. Because then when that money is there, and it removes some of that anxiety, because maybe my tendencies in life were money based, right? But so then when I started to fill that void, I started to really, I became a more spiritual person, and I think because I felt like I didn't have to chase that as much, although it was definitely a component. But then you start really experimenting with the whole spiritual side of your business journey, because I think one thing I'll tell you is that, I think skill set is actually overtaught in our industry. And I think mindset is not taught enough. So essentially what you have in our industry is a bunch of skilled people, right? Everyone knows what to do, but they don't have the proper mindset. And that's why there's a lot of failure in our industry, because people fail to teach the proper mindset. So we got a lot of people that know what to do. They know they need to be making calls, but there's a disconnect, right? There's a disconnect there. That the disconnect is mindset, and they don't have the mindset in order to come in every day at 8 o'clock, right? There's something missing. There's a missing component. And so if I would say, my nugget to your listeners would be that start teaching mindset, right? So that was definitely a part of my journey. And so you talk about enjoying the ride. I started to enjoy the ride definitely when I started concentrating more on my personal mindset, and started to win my mornings, right? We talked about that, and starting to journal and starting to do my devotionals. And I have an app, called Grateful, right? I'm writing down every day what I'm grateful for. That's the way I start out every morning. And, so like, listen, I don't have everything figured out, man, not by any stretch of the imagination. And certainly, I'm at a different place in my growth journey than you are. But that's all part of enjoying the ride, is just, stepping back, taking a deep breath sometimes, and understanding that, it is all about the journey. It's not about the destination. And so, I try to enjoy it as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, talk about, and this happened to me probably 3 or 4 years ago. And it really took the pressure off when, I'm a believer. And so I'm playing like the longest game, so for me, there's like here on earth, and then there's an eternal, like, what's the real contribution I can make? Two things though, when you start your day in some kind of grounding, a meditation or devotion or in the word, and then you end your day with like great things, and I do this with my children. I do it with my wife. I do it individually. What are the 3 awesome things that happened today? And what's one thing you could have maybe done better today? And it's just that practice. If you take nothing from this, and there's been a dozen great topics and things you've challenged the listeners with, if there's one thing you could take, it's those 2 things, because it really doesn't matter where you are in your journey. You can bring this sense of contentment to it with just a daily practice of slowing down, being still. The actual translation for that piece of scripture, be still and know that I'm God. Be still is translated into cease striving. Cease striving. So God, and if you're not a believer, you still just stop striving, stop trying so hard, chasing something that you're never going to catch, and then just appreciate what you have. And then, how does a guy that achieves number 2 for Keller Williams commit suicide? Like, how does it happen? A man of God, young children, a great wife. It happens because he's on this, and I don't know the guy personally, but it happens because you get into this thing that you feel like you can't keep up, or you're not achieving fast enough, or who knows. But so let me ask a handful of quick fire questions. So like 1-2 word answers.
Okay.
All right. What keeps you up at night when it comes to the business?
I think just being able to provide the proper platform for our team members to have success.
Awesome. What were you most afraid of when you started building the real estate team?
Hiring.
Yeah. What's the best advice you've ever received about business?
I think that for me, the best advice I've ever had, honestly, I have to go back to the mindset, man. The mindset, the mindset of just being present. Like you can't change the past, and the future's not happened yet. So the only place you can be is in the present, right? So just do what you can do right now.
That's great. What's one book you would recommend to our listeners?
Mindset book would definitely be As a Man Thinketh by Dr. James Allen. Fantastic book. Excellent.
I'm going to write that down. As a Man Thinketh.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and if you buy it on Audible, get the I think there's a bonus from Poverty to Power. So get that one because those two paired together are really, really good.
Cool. That's great. I love it.
Yeah.
That question's more for me than anyone else. I just like to hear what successful guys are listening to or reading. All right. Last question as we're winding down. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
Well, the easy answer to that question is I think I would just slow down a little bit. I think I would when I added a component to my business, I would understand that there's a layer of accountability that comes with each component that you add, and making sure to dial that in appropriately before we moved on to add a different component or another component.
Yeah, that's really good. Actually, I'm going to give you one more. There's a lot of folks in our industry, really at every level, that are struggling. And it shows up in different ways. It shows up in, they go to comfort, they go to, relationships suffer, physical health suffers, they get off track with their spiritual stuff. What are some words of encouragement you would give someone who's struggling right now?
I would say, I think that you need to understand that there's a cost to acquiring knowledge, and you need to pay that no matter what it is, because the difference between where you are right now and where you want to be is just knowledge. I always ask people, what's more important, the map or the treasure, right? And I think people want to make a snap decision and say that the treasure is more important, right? And the reality of it is you could not get to the treasure without the map. So the map's more important. Yeah. So, I would say just, double down on your personal development and seek out somebody in your marketplace or somebody who's where you're at, who would be willing to share with you. Seek them out, take them to lunch, offer to add value into their lives in some way, and get as much information as you can, because you're only a few years away, potentially a few months away from where you want to be. You make the right decisions.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate your time. If you're listening and, part of this story kind of strikes a chord, you've kind of figured some things out and it's sort of getting away from you. Just go to realestatebschool.com. I had the pleasure working with Mike for, a little bit of time, and you could tell in his own right, this dude is a hard charger, and, to be able to sort of, what's the word for it? Kind of help direct some of that, is something. If that's you, just go to realestatebschool.com. I don't normally pitch it on this show, but we've had the chance to work together, and you're just a good dude. So, just thank you for your time and appreciate it. If there's ever anything I can do for you, you just reach out.
Absolutely, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. See ya.